Have you ever been punished for something you couldn't control? Imagine being born into the most powerful family in the country, expected to be a warrior, a predator, a king. But instead, you came into the world with nothing. No wolf, no power, no destiny, just silence where your other half was supposed to be. That was Caleb Ashford's reality. He was the Alpha King's only son. But at 22 years old, he still hadn't shifted. Not once. Not even a flicker. To the Iron Ridge Pack, one of the oldest and most feared wolf clans in the American Pacific Northwest, he wasn't a crown prince. He was an embarrassment, a walking scar on the Ashford bloodline. On the night of his execution, everyone expected him to die. Nobody expected the invisible Omega Maid, a quiet, gray-uniformed girl named Wren Cole, to sprint into the middle of the ceremony and interrupt the king himself. And nobody could have predicted what she pulled out of her apron pocket. Because what she held wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a spell. It was a crumpled envelope that had been sitting in a trash pile for 3 years, waiting for someone brave enough to use it. What she revealed didn't just save Caleb's life. It tore the Iron Ridge Pack's entire history apart at the seams. This is the story of the Alpha King's son, born Wolfless, and the Omega Maid who lit the fuse. Before we continue, take a second to support the channel. Tap the like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts. Now get comfortable. Grab your headphones. You are not ready for this twist. The rain in Iron Ridge, Oregon didn't fall like normal rain. It came sideways, carried in on cold Pacific winds that rolled down from the Cascades and hit the valley like a wall of ice. It soaked into the stone walls of Ashford Hall, a massive, sprawling estate that looked less like a family home and more like a monument to power, and it gathered in dark pools on the flagstone courtyard, reflecting the dim light from the torches inside. I had been polishing the marble floors of the East Corridor for 4 hours when the shouting started. I am Wren Cole, Omega, 2nd class, age 19, assigned to Ashford Hall for the past 3 years, ever since the pack took me in as an unclaimed after my mother died. I was not remarkable in any way that the pack could see. I was small, 5'4" on a good day, with dark auburn hair I kept pinned back under a plain white headscarf and gray eyes that people always said looked too serious for someone my age. My uniform was the standard Omega gray, shapeless, ill-fitting, and permanently stained with whatever I'd been cleaning that day. Today it was lemon oil and silver polish. I had learned, early on, to be invisible. Omegas who made themselves seen had a way of disappearing. But even invisible girls have ears. And even invisible girls can hear a king shattering his composure from 3 rooms away. I set down my polishing cloth and moved toward the sound, keeping to the edges of the hallway where the rugs muffled my footsteps. I reached the doorway to the great study, a high-ceilinged room lined with mahogany shelves and the mounted trophies of ancestors who had been more successful than the man currently occupying the carved oak chair at its center. King Dorian Ashford was 63 years old and looked 45. Alpha blood did that, stretched time, kept the body strong well past when it had any right to be. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, with silver threading through his dark hair and a jaw that had never once in his life expressed uncertainty. He sat with a crystal glass of bourbon in his right hand, squeezing it so hard I half expected it to crack. Across from him stood his son, Caleb Ashford. I had been watching Caleb Ashford for 3 years without him ever once noticing me. That was both the curse and the gift of being an Omega Maid in a royal household. He was 22 years old, and he was, I have to be honest with myself here, standing in that doorway in my ugly gray dress, remarkable to look at. He had his father's height and the sharp bone structure of the Ashford line, but his mother's coloring, warm brown skin, dark eyes that went almost black in dim light, and a jaw that could have been carved from the same mahogany as the furniture. He was built like a man who had compensated for the absence of a wolf by destroying himself in training, broad, lean, powerful in every physical sense of the word, except the only sense that mattered in this world. He had no wolf. The pack's physician had confirmed it 3 years ago, and again 2 years ago, and again 6 months ago. The gene was present, dormant, the doctor had said carefully, like it was sleeping, but at 22, dormant was just another word for absent. A man who hadn't shifted wasn't a late bloomer in the Iron Ridge Pack's understanding of the world. He was defective. The council vote is tomorrow night, King Dorian said, his voice a low, controlled grind. He wasn't looking at his son. He was watching the rain streak down the window like he was personally offended by it. Commander Harlan Drake has submitted a formal petition. He's calling it a cleansing. Caleb didn't flinch. I watched him absorb that word, cleansing, like a man catching a punch he'd been waiting for. A cleansing, Caleb repeated, his voice flat and very, very quiet. He's claiming your condition is an insult to the Lunar Covenant, that allowing a Wolfless heir to carry the Ashford name contaminates the bloodline. Dorian finally looked at his son. He wants it handled before the full blood moon. Tomorrow. Handled, Caleb said. You mean executed? Dorian said nothing. That silence was its own kind of answer. And you? Caleb asked. His voice was steady, but his hands, God, his hands were gripping the back of the chair in front of him, and I could see his knuckles going pale. What do you want, father? Do you want me handled, too? The king stood, and the pressure in the room shifted. The kind of shift that happened when pure alpha energy rolled off a person without warning, a physical heaviness in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. I want a son who can hold this pack together, Dorian said. I want a son who can answer the howl. He stopped. He pressed his lips together. What I want doesn't change what is. He set down his glass with a sharp click and walked out. The door slammed, and Caleb stood alone in the middle of the room, looking at his father's empty chair like a man reading his own gravestone. That was when my hands started shaking. Because I knew something. I had known it for 3 years, and I had been too frightened to say a single word about it. Because Omegas who made themselves seen had a way of disappearing, and the thing I knew, the thing I had found in the trash burn pile behind the East Kitchen, in a crumpled envelope I had almost tossed into the fire myself, was the kind of information that got people killed. But watching Caleb Ashford stand there in the ruins of his father's disappointment, accepting his own death sentence with the quiet dignity of a man who had run out of any other options, I couldn't keep it anymore. I stepped into the room. Your Highness. He turned. Fast. Like a man who'd been interrupted mid-thought in a very dark place. His eyes found me, and I saw the moment he categorized me. Maid, Omega, irrelevant. Standard. Leave the tray. Whatever your name is, he said. His voice was dismissive but not cruel. He just wasn't seeing me. That was fine. I was used to not being seen. Wren, I said. My name is Wren Cole, and I can't leave. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, not yet, but attention. Real attention. Like a switch had flipped. Excuse me? My heart was hammering. My whole body felt like it was 1 degree from shaking itself apart. But I lifted my chin, the way I'd seen his mother do in the portrait at the top of the main staircase. Queen Leora Ashford, who had died when Caleb was 7, and who had always looked like she was daring the world to argue with her. You're not broken, I said. You're not Wolfless, Caleb. The use of his name, no title, just his name, landed like a dropped plate. His eyes went sharp. You have approximately 4 seconds, he said, very quietly, to explain yourself before I have you removed. I have proof, I said, and my hand moved toward my apron pocket. Get out, he said. Low. Cold. I have. Get out. His voice cracked through the room like a whip, and his arm swept the bourbon glass off the edge of the desk. It hit the floor and exploded into glittering pieces. I flinched. I couldn't help it. My whole body went rigid with the old Omega instinct. Make yourself small, make yourself gone, don't be the one who catches the anger. But I didn't leave. I curtsied. I backed toward the door. I kept my face down and my hands folded. Classic invisible Omega. But as I pulled the door shut behind me, I pressed my lips together and whispered to the empty corridor. I'm going to save you, even if you never know my name. The Iron Ridge Amphitheater wasn't a building. It was a wound in the earth, a natural bowl of stone and old-growth cedar at the base of the Ashford mountain, where the rock had split centuries ago and the pack had turned the scar into a gathering place. Torches lined the rim, 40 of them burning even in the freezing rain. The smoke rose in dark columns and disappeared into the overcast sky. It was nearly midnight when they brought Caleb down. I had followed at a distance, keeping to the tree-line, my gray uniform soaked through, my teeth chattering. I shouldn't have been there. Omegas didn't attend sacred ceremonies. Omegas were back at the hall, keeping the fire going and the floors clean and their mouths very, very shut. But I was there. I counted nearly 600 pack members filling the stone seats, every alpha, every beta, every mid-rank wolf in the territory. They wore dark ceremonial cloaks. The air smelled of wet fur and pine resin and something older, the metallic bite of bloodlust dressed up as tradition. In the center of the pit stood Caleb. They had stripped him to the waist in the November cold. His dark skin was sheened with rain, his chest rising and falling with the slow, deliberate breathing of a man controlling his fear with everything he had. He wasn't shackled. Wolfless as he was, he didn't need to be. He was just standing there, alone in the dirt, with 600 people deciding whether he lived or died. On the raised stone platform above the pit stood King Dorian, looking like something carved out of the mountain itself. And beside him, almost close enough to be touching, stood Commander Harlan Drake. Harlan Drake was one of those men who wore violence like other men wore cologne. He was 45, bull-necked, with close-cropped steel-gray hair and a scar that ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw. He was already half-shifted, the alpha gold bleeding into his eyes, his canines just slightly too long for a closed-mouthed smile. He was grinning, enjoying this. I had always hated him. Tonight, I understood exactly what kind of creature he was. For 22 years, Drake said, his voice rolling out over the amphitheater with the resonance of a man who had rehearsed this, the Iron Ridge Pack has waited for its crown prince to come into his power. We have fed him. We have sheltered him. We have educated and protected him. He paused for effect. And in return, we have received nothing. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The silence itself was a verdict. The lunar covenant is clear, Drake continued. The alpha bloodline must be strong. A king without a wolf cannot command the frequency. He cannot hold the territory. He cannot protect this pack from what is coming. He let that sit. Tonight is the blood moon, the last possible night for the gene to manifest. And if it does not, he looked down at Caleb with something that wasn't contempt so much as satisfaction. The law of the first alpha is clear. King Dorian stepped forward. His face was stone. His eyes were stone. Everything about him was stone tonight, and I hated him for it. Hated him for how easy it was for him to stand there above his own child and call it duty. Caleb Ashford, the king said. Do you have anything to say before judgment is rendered? Caleb looked up. He looked up at the sky, at the hidden moon behind the storm clouds, and I saw his throat move as he swallowed. I saw the thing he was swallowing. Hope, grief, 22 years of trying and trying and trying in a body that would not cooperate. Then he looked at his father. I am my mother's son, Caleb said. His voice carried, clear and steady, across the stone and the rain. If this is how the Ashford line ends, it ends standing. For just a fraction of a second, so brief I almost missed it, King Dorian's jaw tightened. Something moved across his face. It was gone before it could become anything. Commander Drake, the king said. Carry out the judgment. Drake didn't wait. He stepped off the platform and fell, mid-air, shifting into his wolf, a massive, dark-brindle animal, broad as a draft horse, with teeth like ivory knives. He hit the ground running, and the crowd pulled back from the edge instinctively as 600 pounds of alpha wolf charged through the mud toward the wolfless prince. Caleb planted his feet. He raised his hands. He was going to fight. Of course he was. It was completely suicidal and completely Caleb Ashford, and I watched him brace, and I thought, not if I can help it. I ran. I had been an Omega Maid for 3 years. I had spent 3 years being very small and very quiet and very careful. In about 15 seconds, all of that was over. I burst through the line of standing pack members at the rim, shoved past a startled beta guard, slipped in the mud, caught myself on someone's arm, and kept running. Down the slope of the amphitheater, across the floor of the pit, placing my body between Caleb Ashford and a charging alpha wolf. The wolf, Drake, skidded to a halt. He was so close that I felt the spray of wet dirt hit my legs. His breath hit me in a hot, rancid wave. He was enormous up close. His shoulder was at my chin level. He could have closed the distance in a single stride. He didn't. He snarled, low and sustained, a sound that vibrated inside my sternum. "Remove her." King Dorian's voice came from above, sharp with fury. "Guards, remove the girl now." "You can't kill him," I screamed. My voice didn't sound like me. It sounded like someone who had nothing left to lose, which, right now, was accurate. "He's not Wolfless. He was poisoned. Someone poisoned him." The silence that fell was complete. Even the rain seemed to pause. I reached into my apron pocket with a hand that was shaking so hard I could barely feel my fingers. I pulled out the envelope. It was crumpled and rain-softened and had been folded and unfolded so many times in the last 3 years that the creases had gone almost transparent. I held it up. "I found this in the trash burn pile behind the East Kitchen 3 years ago," I said, loud enough to carry. "I kept it because I didn't know what to do with it. But I know what it says, and you all need to hear it." I turned, and for the first time I pointed. Not at Drake. Not at the king. At the woman standing on the far end of the raised platform, beside the ceremonial fire. A thin, elegant woman in her 50s, with silver hair pinned elaborately at the nape of her neck and pale, watchful eyes. Pack physician Dr. Sylvia Marin. "This is a receipt," I said, my voice cracking on the edges. "From a private research institute in Montana, the Halverson Clinic. It's a receipt for a specialized wolfsbane-derived compound, a gene suppression serum designed to lock a dormant wolf gene into stasis. It prevents it from activating indefinitely." I turned back to the crowd. Caleb Ashford wasn't born wolfless. Someone has been suppressing his wolf since he was 5 years old. The amphitheater didn't erupt immediately. It went utterly, completely still for about 4 seconds, and then it became chaos. 600 pack members, all trying to talk at once, sounds like a river breaking through a dam. It hit in waves, first a murmur, then a roar, then individual voices punching through. "Who signed it? And how do we know it's real? And put the Omega down. She's lying." King Dorian descended the stone steps. He moved past Drake, who had shifted back into human form and was standing very still, watching me with an expression I couldn't read, and walked across the mud of the pit floor toward me. The crowd fell back as he moved. He stopped in front of me, and the alpha pressure radiating off him was like standing next to a barely contained explosion. He held out his hand. I gave him the envelope. He opened it. He tilted it toward the nearest torch. He read it. His eyes moved line by line, and I watched his face change. Watched the stone of it crack in places, small fractures spreading from behind his eyes out toward his jaw. He read it twice. "Who authorized this?" he said. His voice was very quiet now. The quieter he got, the more dangerous it felt. "There's a signature on the authorization line." He looked up at me. "Who signed this, girl?" "I know what name is on it," I said. "But I think you should say it. Because I'm an Omega, and they won't believe me." Dorian looked at me for a moment, a long, searching look, like he was seeing me for the first time, and then he looked at the envelope again. He looked up at the platform. At Dr. Sylvia Marin. Marin didn't move, didn't blink. The ceremonial firelight played across her face, and she looked exactly like what she had always looked like. Composed, professional, untouchable. "Sylvia," Dorian said. His voice carried like a stone breaking. "Your Majesty," Marin said, still composed. "The girl is a confused Omega who found a piece of trash. The signature on this authorization," Dorian interrupted, "is yours." The crowd went silent again. "Your personal physician registration number," Dorian said. "Your clinic account number at the Halverson Institute. And the payment, $42,000, was routed through the Pack Medical Fund." He let the paper fall to his side. Under what circumstances, Sylvia? Marin's composure finally cracked. Just slightly. A tremor at the corner of her mouth, quickly suppressed. You don't understand what you're looking at, she said. I understand exactly what I'm looking at, Dorian said. The Ashford bloodline carries a gene that hasn't been seen in 3 centuries, Marin said, her voice shifting into something almost passionate. Do you understand what that means? A lichen gene. Not a wolf, a lichen. A prehistoric predator that the pack has no capacity to control. I was protecting the... You were protecting Harlan Drake, Caleb said. Everyone looked at him. He was still standing in the center of the pit, still shirtless, still covered in rain and mud. But something in his posture had changed. He was looking at Marin with a coldness I had never seen on his face before. Because without me, Caleb said, Drake becomes the heir. That was always the plan, wasn't it? He looked at Drake. How long have you two been working together? Drake smiled. It was the smile of a man who has been caught but hasn't decided he's lost yet. And there's something else, I said. Everyone looked at me again. I was getting very tired of everyone looking at me, but this was not the time to go shy. I reached into my other apron pocket and pulled out the vial. It was small, maybe 2 inches long, and inside it, suspended in clear liquid, was a tiny piece of silver-gray metal about the size of a grain of rice. And it was pulsing. A slow, rhythmic blue-white glow, like a heartbeat. I found this 6 months ago, I said. Sewn into the mattress seam of the prince's bed. I didn't know what it was at first. But I have been reading, I spent a lot of time reading, and I found a paper in one of the old research archives about frequency-dampening technology. Technology designed to disrupt the wolf shift mechanism at the neurological level. I held the vial up so the crowd could see the pulse of light. This is not a medical device. This is not magic. This is a suppressor chip. And someone put it inside the prince's sleeping space to make absolutely certain the serum alone wouldn't be enough. I looked at Caleb. He was staring at the vial. And I watched something happen to him that I had never seen happen to another person before. It started in his eyes, a kind of realization so large it had nowhere to go, and then it moved through him, this slow, cresting wave of understanding. 22 years of shame and silence, and the constant grinding weight of believing himself broken. He took a step toward me. He held out his hand. I placed the vial in his palm. The moment the glass touched his skin, the blue light flickered. Then went dark. Then, Caleb dropped to his knees. The sound that came out of him was not a scream, in any normal sense of the word. It was what a scream would sound like if it had been locked in a room for 22 years and finally got the door kicked open. It split the night and silenced the rain and stopped every heart in the amphitheater. And then the shift began. I had seen wolves shift before. Every Omega in a pack household has. It's messy and violent and biological, the kind of thing that makes you deeply aware of what bodies actually are under all the social structures we build around them. What happened to Caleb Ashford was not like that. It was like watching a building come apart at the foundation and something older and larger rise up in its place. He grew. That was the only word for it. He simply grew, his body expanding and reshaping with a crack and grind of bone that made the crowd step back as one. The dark fur that emerged wasn't the warm brown or gray brindle of the Iron Ridge wolves. It was black. Deep, absolute black, absorbing the torchlight. He rose up on 2 legs, upright, not on all 4s, because what emerged from Caleb Ashford wasn't a wolf. It was something that hadn't walked this earth in 300 years. The lichen stood 7 feet tall in the center of the amphitheater, its shoulders as wide as a doorframe, its claws cutting rivulets in the mud. Its eyes, when it raised its enormous head, were not gold or yellow or any color a normal wolf had ever worn. They were violet. Deep, burning, luminous violet. It pulled back its head and it roared, and every torch in the amphitheater went out simultaneously. 600 wolves dropped to their knees. Every single one of them. Not out of choice. Out of pure biological instinct, the old programming firing beneath every layer of civilization, telling them in the oldest language available. Something above you just announced itself. The lichen stood in the sudden dark, breathing. looking. Its massive head turned slowly, and its violet eyes found me. I did not run. I probably should have. I was the only person still standing in that amphitheater, and there was a 7-foot prehistoric predator looking directly at me, and every survival instinct I had was absolutely screaming. But I looked back at it. At him. At Caleb. The lichen lowered its snout. It sniffed once, twice. Then it made a sound, low, rumly, somewhere between a sigh and something I could only describe as relief, and it pressed its nose very gently against my shoulder. The crowd did not breathe. Then the lichen turned toward Harlan Drake. And Drake ran. He didn't make it far. Caleb didn't kill Drake that night. I stopped him. Again. I grabbed the fur on his massive forearm and I said, very quietly into the chaos of screaming pack members and Drake's panicked retreat, "We need him alive. We need to know who else is involved." The lichen froze. The violet eyes came down to me. In them was a rage, so immense and so complete that I felt it as a physical pressure on my chest. A wall of heat and fury and 22 years of injury finally given a body to inhabit. I put my hand on his snout. "It's Wren," I said. "You know me. You never looked at me, but I was always there. And I'm asking you to stop." The violet light flickered. Dimmed. And Caleb Ashford, 22 years of suppressed power and 3 minutes of lichen, folded back into himself. The shift reversed with a violence that left him gasping on his hands and knees in the mud, human again, trembling with exhaustion and shock and the overwhelming effort of containing what had just been unleashed. I dropped beside him. I pulled my apron off and draped it over his shoulders, which was completely useless and also the only thing I had. "I've got you," I said, because there was nothing else to say. His hand found my wrist in the dark. Gripped it. "Don't let them take you," he rasped. "Nobody's taking me anywhere," I said. He passed out. 3 days later, I was in an interrogation room. It wasn't unkind, as interrogation rooms go. There were no restraints. There was a glass of water on the table and the room was heated, which I noted with appreciation because the rest of Ashford Hall was drafty this time of year. But the two men sitting across from me, King Dorian and his intelligence chief, a quiet, sharp-eyed man named Commander Voss, had questions I wasn't entirely sure how to answer. "You recognized a military-grade frequency suppressor chip," Voss said for the 3rd time. His tone was not accusatory so much as genuinely confused. "At 19 years old, as an Omega Maid." "I read," I said. "A lot. The library in the East Wing has a section on applied biophysics that most people haven't touched in 20 years. I had time." "And the envelope," Dorian said. "You kept it for 3 years without telling anyone." "I was frightened," I said, which was the most honest thing I had said in this room. "I'm an Omega. If I walk into this room 3 years ago and say, 'Excuse me, Your Majesty, I believe your son is being poisoned,' there are about 6 possible outcomes, and approximately 5 of them end with me in a ditch somewhere." Dorian looked at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "The 6th outcome." "The 6th outcome is this," I said, "which is still somewhat ditch-adjacent, but at least he's alive." The door opened. Kayla walked in. He looked different. Not just physically, though 3 days of recovery had put color back in his face, and he was wearing actual clothes, which helped. He looked different in a way that was harder to articulate. The quiet, controlled desperation that had lived behind his eyes for 3 years was gone. In its place was something I didn't have a word for. Certainty, maybe, like a man who has finally heard his own heartbeat. He looked at me in the chair, and something flared in his expression. "Are you all right?" he said. "I'm fine," I said. "You've been here for 2 hours." He looked at his father. "Why has she been here for 2 hours?" "We had questions," Dorian said. "You have a traitor in your medical staff and a conspiracy that goes back 17 years, Caleb said. "Mara Wren is not the issue." I noted, with a small private warmth, that he had remembered my name wrong at first and then corrected himself. He crossed the room and put a hand on my shoulder, and I felt the Pac Omega in me try to shrink, and I told it firmly to stop. "She is under my protection," Caleb said, to the room at large. Anyone who keeps questioning that will answer to the lichen. There was a silence. Dorian said carefully, "Sit down, Caleb. Both of you. Because we have found something in the DNA results from the blood sample the physician took when you first arrived, Wren, and it changes everything." I sat. Voss laid a folder on the table. He slid it toward Caleb first, then me. "Your mother was an Omega," Dorian said to me. "She died when you were born. You were raised as an unclaimed. You've always believed yourself a standard Omega of unknown parentage." "Yes," I said. "Your father," Dorian said, "was a Frostwalker." The word sat in the air. Caleb's head came up sharply. "The Frostwalkers were wiped out in the Cascade War," Caleb said. 50 years ago. They were," he stopped.
He looked at me.
"They were healers," I said slowly.
"And peacekeepers."
They had a biological ability to soothe aggression, to dampen rage responses in alpha wolves. I had read about them in the East Wing library. I had thought it was history.
I had not thought it was me.
"Your blood carries the Frostwalker frequency," Voss said. "A natural counter-resonance to alpha aggression. Which is why you were able to stop the lichen in the amphitheater. It wasn't courage, or rather, it wasn't only courage. Your presence produces a biological calming effect on dominant shifters." "That's why Harlan Drake wanted her dead," Caleb said. He said it very quietly, but something had shifted in his voice. "In the pit. He wasn't just trying to execute me. He was hoping to provoke you into revealing yourself, so he could deal with you in the chaos." I thought about Drake's trajectory in that amphitheater. His hesitation when he saw me step forward. I had thought it was surprise. It had been recognition. "He knew what I was," I said. "The people behind Drake knew what you were," Dorian said. "Drake is not the architect of this. He is a soldier." He looked at Caleb. "We have information that there is an organization called the Silver Pact, a network of high-rank wolves and human defense contractors who have been working for 15 years to eliminate the lichen gene from American packs and sell suppressant technology to territorial councils. They were funded by a man named—" "You need to release Drake," Caleb said. Everyone looked at him. "He'll lead us to them," Caleb said. "Release him. Tell the pack the evidence was insufficient. He's arrogant enough to believe it and stupid enough to go straight back to his handlers." He glanced at Voss. "You have trackers." Voss nodded slowly. "We do."
Caleb looked at me.
Something flickered in his violet eyes, still a shade too vivid since the shift, like the lichen had left a permanent mark on his pigmentation. "And I need you with me when we follow him. Are you willing?" I looked at the king, at Voss, at Caleb. "I'm an Omega Maid," I said. "You're a Frostwalker," Caleb said. "The last one. And you're the only reason I am sitting in this room right now." He held my gaze. "So I'm asking, are you willing?" I thought about 3 years of invisible. 3 years of gray uniforms and lemon oil, and learning to make myself small enough to disappear. "Yes," I said. "I'm willing." They released Harlan Drake on a Tuesday, and by Thursday night the tracker in his bloodstream had led us to Seattle. Specifically, to the rooftop gala at the Cascadia Grand, the largest event venue in the Pacific Northwest, host to the annual Northwest Summit, which was one of those events where wealthy humans and high-ranking pack members pretended they were colleagues and not natural enemies, and everyone drank champagne and made business deals in a room full of string quartets and crystal chandeliers and barely concealed territorial posturing. The perfect cover for a conspiracy. I was wearing a dress I had never in my life imagined wearing. Navy silk, floor-length, with a slit up the left side that made me walk differently just to compensate. My hair was down for the first time in 3 years, falling in waves that someone, a palace stylist who had looked at me with barely concealed shock at the assignment, had apparently decided were an asset. Around my neck was a piece of jewelry I had been told was from the Ashford vault, a small silver pendant, circular, with a faint shimmer to it that was not entirely decorative. That pendant, Caleb had told me before we left, emits a Frostwalker frequency signature. Low-level, passive. If Drake's handlers have scanners, and they will, it will look like noise to their equipment. But our tracker can read it, which means my people can find you if we get separated. Comforting, I had said. He had almost smiled. Almost. In the armored SUV on the way to the venue, Caleb was explaining the cover story to me with the precise, controlled energy of a man who had packed everything he was feeling into a very small box and locked it. "You're my mate," he said. I stared at him. "For the cover," he added. Not quickly enough to be entirely convincing. A prince arriving alone is a target. A mated alpha pair is a unit. It signals stability and hierarchy, and it will stop other dominants from testing me. "Right," I said. "Yes," he said, and looked out the window. The cameras started flashing the moment we stepped out of the car. I had not anticipated the cameras. I had not anticipated the red carpet or the shout of questions or the way 600 strangers turned to look at us simultaneously. I felt Caleb's hand close over mine, warm, steady, real, and he leaned down and said, very quietly against my ear, "Don't look at the lights. Look at the doors." I looked at the doors. We moved through the crowd like Caleb had been doing this his whole life, which I supposed he had, minus the wolf, minus the certainty, minus the violet eyes that now made people step back without knowing exactly why. I kept pace beside him, kept my chin up the way Queen Leora did in the portrait, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that I had been scrubbing floors in this man's house 72 hours ago. Inside the ballroom, all gold and candlelight and the smell of money, I found Drake within 4 minutes. "Near the North Terrace," I said quietly, tightening my hand on Caleb's arm, talking to a man in a white suit. Caleb went very still beside me. "I know the man in the white suit," he said. "Who is he?" "Gideon Cross," Caleb said. His voice was controlled in a way that suggested a great effort. "He runs a defense technology firm called Crosspoint Systems. Government contracts, military applications. He's been calling himself an advocate for human supernatural cooperation for years." A pause. "He's been building weapons to control us." We moved through the crowd, careful, unhurried. We were 8 feet away when Drake looked up and saw us. The blood drained out of his face like someone pulled a plug. Gideon Cross turned more slowly. He was handsome in the way of men who have spent a great deal of money manufacturing handsomeness. Expensive suit, expensive haircut, eyes the color of a frozen lake. He smiled when he saw us, and his smile was the most dangerous thing in the room. "Prince Caleb," he said. "I'd heard you survived the pit." I didn't quite believe it. "I have a good support team," Caleb said, his hand tightening briefly on mine. "The Frostwalker," Cross said, and his eyes moved to me with a hunger that made my stomach turn. "I've been looking for one of those for years. I didn't realize she was hiding in your laundry room." "Drake," Caleb said, without looking away from Cross. "You were supposed to be smarter than this. You said I'd be protected." Drake snapped, his composure cracking. "You told me if I delivered the blood samples, I'd have the tech too." "Drake," Cross said pleasantly, "you failed. Repeatedly." He reached into his jacket. "I thought. Gun." I stepped forward. Caleb's arm came out, blocking me. But it wasn't a gun. It was a small remote. Matte black, single button. Drake made a sound like a man who has swallowed glass. He grabbed at his own throat. His veins, I watched, horrified, darkened, blackened. He dropped. He was dead before he hit the floor. The ballroom erupted. "Nanobots," Cross said, over the screaming, his voice conversational. "I do hate cleaning up after myself manually. It's inefficient." He looked at Caleb. "I should thank you, actually. Bringing the Frostwalker here saves me considerable time." He looked up. On the mezzanine level above the ballroom, I counted 20 armed figures, tactical gear, no insignia, each holding what I recognized, with a cold drop in my stomach as directional sonic emitters. "Fire," Cross said. The sound was not a sound so much as a physical event. A pulse that moved through the room like a shockwave, below the threshold of human hearing but perfectly calibrated for the canine nervous system. To every human in the room, it was a low, uncomfortable hum. To the pack members, and there were dozens in the crowd, it was a scalpel driven into the brain. Caleb went down on one knee. I caught his arm. Around the room, wolves were dropping, some shifting involuntarily, some clutching their heads, some making sounds that weren't human. Fascinating, Cross said, watching Caleb struggle back to his feet with sheer lichen stubbornness. At this frequency, your brain should be shutting down. The lichen constitution is really remarkable. I'm going to enjoy studying it. Two of his guards moved toward us with electric prods. I stepped in front of Caleb. Move, Cross said, not unkindly. You're not a target. Yet. I looked at Caleb, at the blood running from his nose, at the way his hands were shaking with the effort of staying upright, at his violet eyes burning through the pain and the paralysis toward me, and the Omega in me wanted to fold, and the Frostwalker in me did not. I had spent 19 years being the smallest thing in every room. I was done. I closed my eyes. I went inside myself to the place I hadn't known existed until a few days ago, the frequency that lived in my blood like a second heartbeat, and I pulled it up from somewhere deep and certain and old. The Frostwalker scream, when it came, was not a sound of fear. It was a sound of resolution, of reclamation, a ripple of white-silver energy that I felt leave my body like cold water breaking through a wall, expanding outward in every direction simultaneously. It hit the sonic emitters. All 20 of them. The feedback was catastrophic and instantaneous. The glass lenses on the emitters cracked. The electronics shorted. A cascade of sparks rained down from the mezzanine, and then there was silence. Clean, absolute, complete silence, as every sonic pulse cut off at once.
Caleb gasped. He straightened. He looked at me.
And then, before Cross could regroup, before the smoke had even cleared from the shorted equipment above us, Caleb moved. Not the lichen, just Caleb, with his wolf fully awake beneath his skin and 22 years of training and fury behind each movement. He moved faster than Cross's guards could track, faster than their weapons could follow. He was through them before they registered the threat. He grabbed Cross by the throat. "Run," he said to me, and I shook my head. "I'm not running." "Then stay behind me," he said, and proceeded to dismantle the remaining guards with an efficiency that was honestly terrifying and also, I noted with some alarm, deeply impressive. We fought our way to the service exit. Caleb took a bullet to the shoulder that I watched him not flinch at, which told me everything I needed to know about how the lichen healing factor worked. We ran. Into the alley behind the Cascadia Grand, into the cold Seattle night, the rain coming down in sheets, and I thought, we're going to make it. Then a figure dropped from the roof. It landed between us and the SUV with the practiced ease of someone who had done exactly this kind of thing before, dressed in black body armor that moved strangely. Too smooth, too responsive, the joints too precise. It straightened, and the light hit the helmet, and the motion of it was familiar in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. "Caleb," the figure said, and removed its helmet. The silence that followed was worse than the sonic cannons. The man underneath the helmet was perhaps 60. Sharp-featured, gray-haired, with the jaw of the Ashford line and eyes that were green where Caleb's were dark. "Uncle Garrett," Caleb said. His uncle, Garrett Ashford, King Dorian's younger brother. The man who had, according to everything Caleb had ever said about him, been like a second father. The man who had taught him to fight. "I know what this looks like," Garrett said. "It looks," Caleb said very softly, "like betrayal." "It looks like survival," Garrett said. "Your father wanted peace with Cross. Collaboration." I watched him trade away the pack's strength for a seat at the human table, and I decided someone needed to take the long view.
He looked at me.
The Frostwalker blood is the last piece. With it, Cross can build a suppressant that affects all of us permanently. Not just one Wolfless prince. All of us. Controlled. Manageable. Something that might have been conviction moved across his face. "Better controlled than extinct, Caleb. Better dead than what you've become," Caleb said. Garrett engaged the suit. They fought, and it was awful and fast, and I couldn't help with the suit's defenses. My frequency worked on wolves, not machines, so I did the only thing available to me. I climbed into the driver's seat of the SUV. I hit the accelerator. The armored vehicle hit Garrett's suit at 30 miles an hour and knocked him clean off his feet. The suit systems cascaded into emergency shutdown. Garrett hit the pavement and didn't get back up. Caleb looked at the SUV. I leaned out the window. Get in.
He got in.
We drove. We drove and called Voss and transmitted coordinates, and within 4 hours, the Iron Ridge Pack descended on a rusted compound on the Olympic Peninsula coast, an abandoned ironworks facility that Cross had converted into a fortress, and what followed has been described in the Pack records as the Battle of Harrowcliff Point. I will only say this. 600 wolves, led by a lichen, are not a force that fortified gates or sonic cannons or mercenaries can reasonably prepare for. The battle lasted 40 minutes. Cross's men broke in 20. Cross himself tried to use me as a shield. He had been draining my blood into a canister with a needle in my arm for approximately 2 hours when Caleb arrived, and I was not at my best.
Pale. Dizzy.
Aware in a distant way that I had perhaps lost too much of whatever made me who I was. But when I heard Caleb's voice in the foundry, felt the pressure change in the room as the lichen entered it, I focused. I focused on the canister of my own blood in Cross's hand. And I thought very clearly, mine. The blood in the canister heated to the boiling point in approximately 1 second. Cross screamed and dropped it. It shattered. And in the half-second of distraction that bought, Caleb crossed the room so fast he blurred, and Gideon Cross's career as a predator of wolves ended with a sound like a door closing. Caleb caught me before I could fall. He pulled the needle out of my arm with a gentleness that seemed impossible from something so large, and he held me up, his arms around me, his face pressed into my hair. I've got you, he said. He sounded wrecked, like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. I've got you. You're okay. I've got you. You were a good wolf today, I told him. He didn't say anything. He just held on. 6 weeks later, the Iron Ridge Pack held its first open-air gathering in 20 years. Spring came early to the Cascade foothills that year, as if the land itself had been waiting for something to shift. The cherry trees on the Ashford Hall grounds were blooming, white and pink and ridiculous, petals drifting down through the afternoon air like small, insistent celebrations. Someone had opened all the windows in the hall for the first time in the living memory of everyone on staff. I stood on the upper terrace in a dress I still wasn't entirely used to, soft green wool, nothing like gray, and watched the pack gather below in the courtyard. King Dorian had abdicated 4 days after Harrowcliff Point. It had been his choice, quietly, carefully made, and announced in a brief statement that said only that the pack required a leader fit for the new world it had entered, and that he was not that leader. What the statement did not say, but what I knew, was that he had stood at the window of the great study for a long time and looked at his own hands. And then he had walked down the hall and knocked on his son's door and said simply, "It's yours now." The obsidian and gold crown of the Iron Ridge Alpha sat on Caleb's head with a naturalness that made me think it had always been waiting for this particular skull. He stood at the balcony railing below me, talking with Voss and 2 of the new council members, Drake's replacements, chosen for competence rather than ambition, and he had the look of a man who is tired and certain and completely, irrevocably, where he was supposed to be. Garrett Ashford was alive, confined, and awaiting a formal council judgment. Dr. Marin had surrendered within 48 hours of the battle. The Silver Pact network was being dismantled by Voss's intelligence team with an efficiency that suggested Voss had been waiting for exactly this assignment for years. There was still so much to do. There were still packs in other territories that had been approached by Cross. There were still suppressant compounds in distribution networks that needed to be identified and pulled. There was a new treaty framework to negotiate with the human governance structures in the Pacific Northwest, and Caleb was going to have to do it while simultaneously convincing centuries-old pack tradition that a lichen king was not, in fact, a catastrophe. I was going to help with all of it. Not as an Omega Maid. Not as a symbol or a secret or a biological asset to be deployed strategically. As a Frostwalker, the last one, and as myself, Wren Cole, who had spent 3 years reading everything in a library that no one else bothered to open and who had learned very young that the people who are trained to be invisible are often the only ones who see everything clearly. I heard the terrace door open behind me.
Caleb.
I knew his footsteps now. Heavier than before the shift, more deliberate, the lichen adding its weight to everything. He came to stand beside me at the railing. He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the gathering. "The council wants to open the summit in an hour," he said. "I know," I said. "You don't have to attend if you don't want to." "I know that too," I said.
He looked at me.
His violet eyes, in the afternoon light, were remarkable, the color of a storm clearing. "I spent 22 years being told that what I was made me worthless," he said. "And then a woman I never once properly looked at walked in front of a charging wolf to tell me I was wrong." He paused. "I look at you now." My heart did something inconvenient and involuntary. "I noticed," I said. "I want to keep looking," he said. Quiet.
Direct.
The most straightforward thing anyone had ever said to me. Below us, the pack was assembling. 600 wolves finding their places in a new order. The cherry blossoms were still falling. Someone had started playing music somewhere, fiddle, lively and bright, and children were chasing each other between the legs of adults who had learned, in 6 weeks, to lift their faces toward the sun instead of hunching against the rain. "Your Highness," I said, and felt the small, private smile I was becoming less and less inclined to suppress.
"Caleb," he said.
"Caleb," I agreed. I slipped my hand into his. He held on. Below us, the Iron Ridge pack howled, not in grief or supplication or the ancient, anxious signal of a pack that had spent too long afraid of what lived in its own bloodline. They howled the way something howls when it has finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. In triumph, the Alpha King's son was born wolfless, and the Omega Maid who found a crumpled envelope in a burn pile turned out to be the last daughter of a lost line, the one voice old enough and rare enough to wake what had been sleeping. They would tell this story for a very long time, not because it ended perfectly, but because it proved that the people society trains to disappear are often the ones holding everything together, and that the greatest power isn't always the one that announces itself loudest. Sometimes it is very small and quiet, wearing a gray apron, waiting for the right moment. Did you suspect Dr. Marin, or were you thrown by Uncle Garrett's betrayal? Tell me in the comments. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe to Floxy's Romance Tale. We drop new stories every week. Click the bell so you never miss a tale. See you next time.